So a little bit about Onsite Gallery. We are the public professional gallery of OCAD University and an experimental curatorial platform for art, design, and new media. Currently on view in the gallery until April 25th is Codex, Playable and Disruptive Futurist E-Art, which is a group exhibition of digital artworks that explore human-machine relationships and how society is influenced by technology, innovation, and design. So at the front desk, you're welcome to take one of our exhibition brochures, which has more information on the show and a list of our other free public events. So tonight we're very fortunate to have with us a panel of experts who will share their insight and perspective on our growing dependence on glitchy AI learning for business and culture and how this affects our daily lives. So thank you also to Leyla and Elaine who are providing this interpretation for this event tonight. So a little bit about our panelists. We have here Jimmy. So among his many accomplishments, Jimmy Baugh developed the Atom Optimizer, one of the go-to algorithms to train deep learning models. Jimmy completed his undergraduate degree, master's degree, and PhD at the University of Toronto. Jimmy's research focuses on the development of learning algorithms for deep neural networks. And to his right is Leyla. So Leyla Imanirad has been working at Bristol Gate Capital Partners since 2011. For 9 years, she led the data engineering and technology acquisition efforts to build the research infrastructure at Bristol Gate. As a practitioner, Leyla believes in harnessing the power of the artificial intelligence while being cognizant of its limitations. As a communicator, she enjoys raising awareness about the technology and its impact on our collective future. She has a master's degree in computer and biomedical engineering from the University of Toronto. And then third in is Dr. Alexis Morris, who is an assistant professor in the Digital Futures program here at OCAD University and the Canada Research Chair Tier 2 in the Internet of Things. He is the director of the Adaptive Context Environments Lab and is a specialist in the overlapping research domain of software engineering for adaptive systems based on the incorporation of fuzzy human factors in socio-technical systems. His work engages a cross-section of approaches in artificial intelligence, virtual and augmented reality, passive brain-computer interfaces, adaptive risk management, multi-agent systems modeling, organizational culture simulations, and pervasive technologies. And then on the end here, we have Tom Barker, who's the curator of the Codex exhibition and our moderator tonight. He's worked internationally as a multidisciplinary creative in the fields of design, art, and technology for many years. Tom's diverse and groundbreaking collaborations have included the capsule and boarding design for the London Eye Ferris wheel, created the world's first Bluetooth headset for MK, and projects with the late architect Zaha Hadid for buildings, dance, and opera stage sets. He was the founding chair of the Digital Futures program at OCAD and is currently the president and chief technology officer of Six Trends, a Toronto-based creative digital agency. So quickly, here's the format for our event tonight. First, each of our panelists will share a short presentation of 3 slides so you can get to know them and their interests. Following that, we'll have a panel discussion moderated by Tom, after which point we'll open it up to the audience for Q&As. So now I'm happy to pass the floor over to Alexis, who will kick off the event with his slide presentation.
All right. Thanks everyone for kind of coming out for tonight. It's great to see it's kind of reasonably well attended. So today we're going to talk about this really interesting topic, right? Can machines be flawed enough to be human? And so I only have like 2 minutes per slide, so I have to kind of introduce myself. So Linda gave a very nice introduction. So this is my snapshot of myself. So my background in computer science, very interdisciplinary, very broad. So I specialize in multi-agent systems that understand and perceive elements from the world, take a decision, make an action based on that. So from the more recent research side. I'm also a researcher here in the Internet of Things, where I'm looking at how we can make smart spaces more aware of what people are doing in the spaces, and also how we can make people within smart spaces more aware of what the system is actually doing. And so together, there's a rich domain of possible ways how we're going to interact and engage with a smart environment in the future. So, what I like to think about what I call avatars, agents, and adaptive AI assistants. They don't have to be assistants, but that's where we're starting our adventure. So, an avatar, a representation of, either an information object, another kind of object. But in mixed reality, we can think of, what happens when we're in a space and, the space is able to project content to us. Currently, when we look around, there's, we see signs there. They're all around. Signs are everywhere. But the signs are static. The signs are two-dimensional. And the signs are not in context necessarily with what you might be actually doing. So, if we start looking at those concepts in terms of how do we make our world more alive? So, I look at these three things. So, the mixed reality kind of saw that's the spectrum between the real world, completely virtual, context, which is the situations that are taking place and how we understand those situations. And then AI is the glue between all of these things, between making the right set of interface responses that fit with what people might be doing. And so what we kind of see here, there are just a subset of some of the things that I get to kind of play around with, which is, what do we do with 3D content? How do we interact with mixed reality interfaces? To the top right there is kind of a fun little plant avatar. So effectively, when the plant in our lab gets upset, we start seeing this behavior from this virtual character. And so the notion there is, in the next few years, we might have a scenario where our spaces are just jumping out at us in interesting ways. So it depends on how much we would like to design for that. But we're exploring elements there. So I think I only have 2 minutes. So, so the last slide is supposed to be related to an issue that I think is really important for us to kind of think about as we explore the AI question. And so, of all of the different things that we think about when we think about artificial intelligence, so we think about robots, and we think about computer vision, and we think about the detection of certain events. But there's this other side to this, which is towards generation, creation, using artificial intelligence. So we're at a stage now in the AI landscape where we can now kick off trained processes, trained models that can now produce new things by having seen certain examples. And so on this slide here, I just have some stuff there, but to reflect on recognition is great. Generation allows us to think about creativity. What does it mean to be creative? We used to think that was a human-only thing. I suspect we will be forced to reevaluate that opinion very quickly. The image that you see there of that face was completely generated. So that is a machine learning, there's a machine learning model. If you have your phone, you can always go to thispersondoesnotexist.com and you can refresh the page and get a different face every single time, because there's a machine learning model that's learned what faces should look like and is able to look for another one and look for another one. But this is a reference to the 2020 or late 2019 version of that, which is absolutely phenomenal. If you look at that as a large image, it's kind of you can also combine different faces take two faces, merge them, what do you get? So generation is a factor here. Now, because I think I'm over on my time, I will just also highlight this other side here, which is something that forces us to think about meaning. So if you were to ask anyone, okay, answer this question, how creative can a machine really be when compared to a human? And you say, okay, finish the thought. You might go off and write an essay, right? You might, refer to the things that you understand there and write something. Well, this text here was generated by a machine, right? This text was generated by another model. And, it's kind of GPT-2 is the term for it, but it's a transformer type of an approach. But what's beautiful is from that single prompt, we had something that learned to predict what words should come next, which means like a ball rolling down a hill, or rolling down a landscape of a certain kind. You can just keep churning out text. But when you read that text, you get meaningful sentences. It says, do you think artificial intelligence will someday become smarter than us, or are you skeptical that computers can ever be creative? How do you feel about the fact that technology and science are moving so rapidly? And that the very people who shape these developments are often wrong about the way they are, that they continue to evolve. So then there's some questions about, are you optimistic or pessimistic, etc. So that was all learned and generated. Okay, so I'll stop there.
Okay, so everyone, I'm Jimmy. So that actually is perfect segue into my slides. But there is another examples of how transformers can be used to generate someone's CV. So Jimmy is an assistant professor of computer science at the University of Toronto. His research focused on deep learning, and then the rest is being completed by the machine. And its application to the natural language processing, natural language generation, computer vision, and machine learning. Prior to joining the University of Toronto, he worked as assistant professor at Google, where he worked on the algorithm for image classification, speech recognition, and natural language generation. His research project, blah, 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 and actually largely at the ballpark, this is more or less correct. This is actually a better CV than some of the names I worked with at the University of Toronto. Yeah, so you can play with it on this website, how to talk to transformers. And then the image on the right-hand side is essentially a recent, I took a trip to the art gallery recently, and I took a selfie in front of essentially a modern art installation. It's just like a blank, painting. And then I feed this image of selfie. So originally, the background, you can see my cursor, is just all white and just photo kind of frame. And then if I feed into this program called Deep Dream, it starts to fantasize and think about, what could be the, similar items I've seen in my previous training data, and can I hallucinate a bit more? And it turned out, because of the face very close to the frame of my, the frame of the background, the AI actually hallucinated there's actually a face in there, in that photo. So those are the two examples that we can see as well. Turned out machine can be quite creative as well, given the right prompt by the human. And I think that's kind of the topic we're going to come back to. So now back to what I actually do. So my own research is very similar to, what a physicist would do for a photographer, right? So if you think about people who's using AI technology today, or photographers, and so my research tries to understand the underlying algorithms behind them to understand how can we build a machine that's more efficient with respect to the amount of data it learns, and how can we build machines that consume less energy than the current machine we have, right? Because in order to train one of those models in the first slides, that to generate the rest of the story, training one of those models is equivalent in terms of energy cost to taking a transcontinental flight from Toronto to San Francisco 10 times. And so that's a lot of carbon emissions that's essentially generated by machine learning researchers that's doing this kind of research. So previously, a lot of my research is about building algorithms. And these days, my research is about trying to think about how the machine can make mistakes. And how can we have a machine that's very robust when it makes predictions, so we don't discriminate against certain demographics in our community just because they have less data than everyone else because they're the minority of our society. Is there any mathematical insight we can get from the current learning algorithms such that we can have a mathematical guarantee that we do not discriminate against certain groups or have a better, in statistical terms, of having better estimations of your learnable parameters? And half of my other research is about how can we build a machine that's a bit more human-like. So currently the way we train machines is that we have, for example, to train the best image search algorithm that's using Google Search or the Google Translate that you use on everyone's phone. We take, essentially, we convert our data of images into flashcards, completely unrelated to each other, and we flash those flashcards in front of computers and ask the computer to memorize the corresponding objects that are present in the image. Right? That's essentially how our neural network works. And no wonder the network makes a lot of mistakes about fantasizing a human face in front of a blank photo screen, or can be fooled very easily by generating those adversarial scenarios. However, if we look at the state-of-the-art machine learning systems or machine intelligence systems, namely the human, how do we learn? Well, we don't really get as much data supervised. Well, we didn't get much supervision signals from our parents. But we have a lot of opportunity when we're growing up to interact with the world. We know that when we observe someone walking by, that person is just not going to suddenly disappear in front of us, or someone can just walk through the walls. Because we never experienced that, we know everything happens consistently through time, right? So the consistency between time and space is the blessing of human learning, but it does not happen when we actually train those machines. So how can we actually change our current learning paradigms or generate data such that we can actually train machines that's a bit more human-like? So that's my current research program. So now regarding today's discussion, despite being a nerd for 90% of my time, I have a soft spot for art. So I often wonder the question: if Andy Warhol were alive today, what would he think about the generative arts we have today from the AI? And I think Andy Warhol would love it, right? I think that's very much his thing, like a mass production of art that humans set a random seed and see the ball rolling down the hill. And the photo can be generated indefinitely amount of times. And every time will be exactly the same. So now let's look at the 4 pillars of the traditional art. So we have the visual art, which are grouping the visual art and design into the same scenario. So there's a bunch of video links. So some of them you have already seen. Essentially let's see if we can. I think I did something wrong there. Let's see. Do I get something bad? Okay. Escape? Okay.
Talking about glitchy AI.
Yes, that's right. Yes. So in research, there's always a term demo or die. And turned out most of the time you just die on the demo day. It doesn't always work out the way you wanted. Okay, great, perfect. So here's a little, videos of a model that essentially trained a bunch of cat and dog images. And then we take, so usually those models being trained are very opaque to human and why they make certain decisions. And now here, what happens here is that it's just a visualization where we ask the model, here's the 3 pictures of the object, giving interpolation between them, and keep involving those interpolations among the images. And now you can see this infinite amount of non-existent cats and dogs that's being fantasized by the model. Right, so this is examples in the visual art. Similar thing happened, I'm not very good at technology. But same thing happened in the fashion. You can generate infinite amount of fashion models with various clothes that you can have. And even in music. So there was an AI program that happened in AI conference called Europe's, where a bunch of musicians take the Eurovision, which is kind of like I guess, American Got Talent in the rest of the world, and they took all the songs that are very popular, the hit ones in Eurovision, and feed that into a machine, and ask the machine, can you actually generate something similar to those hit songs? And turned out that you can. And in collaboration with the first Eurovision winners, they produced a music video that's quite catchy. I'm not sure if you can hear it, so I'm not going to try to play it. So you can probably just take a photo or ask for a slide afterwards. So what do we see here? So what's the take-home message? So I think what happened with this kind of endless generation and endless streams, what I like to call it, is almost like a new wave of democratization of art and commercial products. So now think about if I'm going to be a YouTube content creator, I don't have to necessarily confine myself to the essentially the copyright of the existing music that I want to use for my background. Now all I need to do is just pick a couple of songs that I like and ask the machine, can you generate me a new song that's the interpolation between the existing contents? If I want to have a fashion model on my website to promote my product, I don't necessarily have to pay big monies to professional models to wear my product, right? So at the conclusion, I think hopefully we can explore a bit more in the rest of the panel here, is that if you think about painters in the early Middle Ages or medieval times, they're pretty much just alchemists, and color has a lot of meaning back in the day associated with where they came from, how we mix them, and today's painter we don't really think about it because we just buy paints from the stores. And the photographers from the 19th centuries, they're essentially the engineers and physicists and also chemists to develop those films and think about how the lens works. And today's indie music, like a lot of my musician friends, they're absolute gurus when it comes to signal processing and auto-tune their voice. So I think the artists of tomorrow is going to be the people who's very going to be quite sophisticated when it comes to their understanding of computer science, the understanding of AI, and how to weld those, just like the paintbrushes we use today, to create arts of tomorrow. Okay, so and that's all my slides.
Moving on to less fancier subjects. Finance. So my name is Leyla, and I'm not much of a chef, but that was from a cookery event, so it was a fun photo to put in. As you can tell, I have touched many things in the past. So anything to do with technology, anything to do with algorithmic trading, forex, cryptocurrencies, a little bit blockchain. What else? And I've also, as part of my work, I've been working artificial intelligence, mostly communication and application side, and machine learning. But also, I've been involved with a lot of women's network and the work that they're doing to basically promote science amongst younger female generations. Because a lot of them don't recognize that they have the same capabilities as guys. I blame our education system, by the way. Now, that's about all the past experiences I have done. By the way, I was actually doing computer vision at U of T many years ago, when it was not still a field. Well, it was, but there was no real application for it, and it was much more difficult because you had to write all those algorithms yourself. There were no real libraries to use. So it was almost like a different time. Now, I'm trying to be a little bit more focused in the future. So my current focus is really, well, it's very hard to ignore the baby. And where we are going with the future of AI and how it's going to impact our lives, that is one area that we are doing some research on. And intelligent finance. So I'm not calling it fintech, or I'm not calling it pure finance, because I don't think finance is going to exist without technology anymore. Finance is just going to be merged, just like any other field. Any other field is just, the technology is going to be part of it. But intelligent finance has the potential to really change how we almost manage our financial lives in the future. And it impacts almost every single person in different ways. So our model of the financial models that we currently have are very simplistic because they had to be. But there is actually no reason anymore to have them as simplistic. And right now we are moving towards a much more complex environment when it comes to the financial modeling. And finally, well, not finally, but climate change has to be on everybody's mind. And it's just one area that I'm reading on, but I have no idea what to do with it. Just like the rest of the science. So some of the applications in finance and the way the field is actually changing finance is, whereas previously maybe a lot of analysts would just sit down and start to look at these financial ratios, how much is the company going to grow its sales next year? And they would draw down these models. But now a lot of those is happening by basically either machine learning based models or some kind of algorithm that's doing a much better job than those analysts. So this is one area of finance which is going through a lot of changes, and that's actually the area that I have been working on for the past number of years. So in our company, for example, what we do is we try to predict dividend and dividend growth of the companies so that we are able to identify the good companies that we want to own, the ones that are able to really become much better and produce a lot of money for the shareholders. Trading algorithms. So much of what you see out there in terms of the trading is a lot of short-term trading, because right now with some of the new, again, machine learning-based models, they try to take advantage of inefficiencies in the market and act on them very quickly. The problem is it's a lot of machines competing each other. So the opportunity to take advantage is actually really, really small. And we have something in our hands today which was just not available many years ago, and that's sentimental analysis, which is really, well, what are people talking about on Twitter about, for example, Nike's new brand of shoes? And it's something that's giving feedback to the analysts again to say, do we project a better sales for Nike this quarter? And a lot of these fields are, a lot of these applications of programming are progressing quite fast. So in a way, finance is any developer's dream field because there is a lot of data in it, unlike some other fields where you don't really have that data. You have the benefit of history, you have, it's very actually mathematical based, which makes it slightly easier. And finally, there's money in it. Lots of stakeholders, they all want to make money. Sometimes they want to make money for other people too, but the number of stakeholders makes it just an interesting field for the developers. But it also comes with its own challenges, because much of that history is actually not what we would call AI ready. It's clean, it's not very clean history, it's actually dirty history. And you have to go and do a lot of job to just make that data good. And of course there is a matter of explainability. If you cannot explain it properly to people how a model is coming up with a decision, then the adoption of that model may cause issues. And now just moving on to one of the applications which was interesting, and I thought for this talk, for the context of this conversation, it's going to be interesting, is about Tay. So Tay was Microsoft's call it chatbot, which they launched in 2016, and it was actually I think March 23rd, 2016, and they announced it as an experiment. It was a social and cultural and also a learning experiment to say the more you talk to it and you tweet with it, the better it learns. Okay? Very neat experience. They were trying to reach millennials and younger people. And they started with a very beautiful hello world tweet. It had already been trained on some data, but it was meant to also learn from people. And in about 13, 14 hours, we got to this. So Tay says, I fucking hate feminists, and they should all die and burn in hell. And that was one of the more polite ones that I picked. There are worse ones, trust me. And so in about a few hours, internet managed to teach Tay to be anti-feminist, to be a Nazi, to be racist, actually very racist, to speak like Trump, and to answer like a Mexican to Trump. So, so they all managed. Now you might say this data set was biased because, I mean, maybe particularly the people who were trying to interact with Tay tried to really teach it that stuff. But at the same time, it tells us something about our nature. Who are we? And what do we believe in? And if we want to teach something to a poor bot, what are we teaching it? So it got to the point that after just 18 hours, Microsoft pulled it down. I mean, they kind of said, you know, Tay is tired, needs to sleep, but Tay never came back to life. Now, the Chinese version of the same application actually has been a lot more successful. I think it has about 16 million followers or something. And maybe that says something about our cultural differences. Maybe they're just more polite. But the real question is, where does the consciousness come to play here? Because when does Tay understand that we are manipulating it? And I think that is really where you can draw the line between, now is the machine aware enough to know that it's being manipulated? So it's, in a way, it's less flawed than humans? Or how do we basically manage to the balance of our creativity in terms of teachers and the creativity of the machine to defend itself? So I think that just opens up for a comment, right?
Fantastic. So I was frantically looking through my questions to see if a machine could have created any of them. I think I'm doing okay. I reckon about, maybe there's two a machine could have done. We'll see. Thank you, all of you, for your really insightful introductions. In fact, I've got lots of questions around those as well, so I think we're going to have a great evening. Of course, we all have lots to say, so I realised when I gave everyone 6 minutes to talk, I should have said -6, because everyone will overrun by 10, 15 minutes. So if I could ask the panel, we're going to do this quite fast responses, but not because we don't want to hear what everyone has to say, it just means that we can have some exchange, yeah? And the questions are really kind of here as a prompt. I think we'll rather just wait entirely to the end for questions from the audience. If there's something compelling we really want to say, we'll take a couple of comments as we go, if that's all right. Otherwise, you'll probably, well, if you're like me, you might have forgotten what it is you wanted to ask by the time you get to the end. Okay, so we're going to kick off. Question for you, Alexis. So Yuval Harari is the celebrated philosopher and author of a book called *Sapiens*, and also 21 Lessons from the 21st Century, which are great books, by the way, I recommend them. His views on AI were very unusual. He writes about AI, and he's a philosopher, yeah? He writes about AI replacing people in our day-to-day relationships, because AI actually excels at understanding us, does it better than other humans. And because they don't have any feelings of their own, they could be completely selfless. His theme was also explored in, I remember, 1975 movie called Stepford Wives, which I think was remade a couple of years back, directed by Brian Forbes. And in that, men were replacing their difficult wives in the suburbs with androids who attend to their every need. Are we heading in that direction?
Thanks. So that's an interesting way to start our conversation, right? Will we be replaced, right, in some of the most important aspects and areas of our everyday lives, right? To a certain extent, there's actually having shorter answers, but the answer is, probably, quite possibly, potentially. So it's not a hard yes or a hard no, so to speak. One example that comes to mind is, who has a self-driving anything? Self-driving vacuum cleaner? Roomba? Who's interacted with an autonomous, robot in your actual space? So it's kind of open. Yeah, there's someone there. Yeah? Yeah.
I don't really know how I interact with my app turns it on and it does its own thing.
Yeah, so you interact with the app and it's doing something and you're able to interpret what it's doing to a certain extent. So the vacuum cleaner example is a nice one because it's just rolling around your floor. And for a certain amount of time, it's very easy for you to say, oh, what are you doing now with vacuum cleaner? Or, oh, you got stuck under the bed again. Or, little things like that. Things that are related to what we call agency, which is, to take in information from the world, make a decision, respond. And so if the agents that we start interacting with become better and more believable, to a certain extent, it's almost like game over. We're almost hardwired to react to certain things in certain ways. So, if we have a little bot that's very much like a puppy, and it becomes very, very, very much like a puppy, you will find yourself responding to it as if it's a puppy. That's quite probable. I think we might be headed to spaces like that. First of all, in addition, let's say we all have self-driving Teslas in the next few years. Who's going to name their self-driving Tesla and give it a persona? And over time, you start learning how that particular Tesla is interacting. You start, so you start feeling for things in certain ways. So I'm very, very. I kind of am towards the camp where I think that's where we're headed, because we're going to start seeing a lot more interactive objects in our spaces and in kind of our everyday routines. Then there's the software side of that, so it gets really more interesting. How many people are actually talking to Siri and Alexa as if they were smarter agents than they actually are? Because we ourselves are very high-functioning agents, so we can fill in the gaps. And that gets interesting. I think I may have gone over on that. I don't know if anyone else wants to touch on that. Other comments on that? No comments?
No, I was just going to say, I think any solution will still very much involve people. So it's not about making us redundant, but it's about making us possibly a lot more powerful in ways that we can't even fathom today. So.
It's interesting. So I do have a robot vacuum cleaner, and I do find myself sometimes watching it, thinking, how does it decide where it's going? That's between you, me, and 40 people. Yeah. On that, Jimmy, I thought it was interesting. You're talking about getting machines to learn how to learn, and when you said, okay, interaction, exploration, I know there's a number of students and educators in the audience today Those are all the things that, in contemporary teaching we try and achieve. Yeah, say the experiential learning and interaction and so on. Do you think that there's a lot that we can actually learn from the way machines learn in terms of feeding that back into our own approaches?
Yeah, I certainly believe so. I guess piggyback to the previous question, I guess the feedback's a bit more philosophical rather than practical, rather. So for an example of K, it's kind of like, just like modern society can expose us about our own psychological weaknesses. With those machine learnings, we kind of have to rethink about what does it mean for something to be fair? What does it mean for something to be discriminating mathematically, right? So what does it mean for something to have conscience? So now we're kind of going back to those very fundamental questions about humanity and asking, can we actually concretely quantify, for example, consciousness, right? John Locke had the idea of consciousness for things like the 16th centuries, but now with AI and everything, on one side, math shows that the learning algorithms are, almost perfect, has very nice mathematical properties, but turned out machine very discriminating when we actually train and implement in the real world. For example, sentence people's in the criminal justice systems, right? Then what does that show about our society? Well, that means the way we generate data as humans are somewhat fundamentally flawed, and so it's kind of like giving back to us to make us think about our own decisions and learn about our own humanities. I think that's beautiful.
Okay, thank you. Right, so I've got a question for you, Leyla, about the singularity. Has anybody heard of the singularity? Yeah? Okay, so the Codex show, which we're sitting in the middle of, has got a moody but not very smart chatbot, so not quite as offensive as Tay, I'm pleased to say. I think we've switched the chatbot off for the talk, thank goodness. Ray Kurzweil is Google's director of engineering, and he's kind of a futurologist. He tells us that computers will have the same intelligence as humans just 12 years from now. He imagines our intelligence multiplying a billionfold in 2045 when we merge with machines. He calls this the singularity. And he has so far claimed 86% accuracy in his predictions. He's made a lot of them since the 1990s. Is he right? Is there any way that we can possibly prepare for this if he is?
So I think part of the problem with singularity is not being able to define it properly. There are multiple definitions. There are people who believe, there are basically different schools of thought that say singularity is when machines become more intelligent than us. Another idea is that happens when, for example, we are augmented with machine intelligence to a level that we are basically exceeding as human beings. There's another one which basically talks about our biological changes. Maybe they can implant something in our brains that just makes us a lot more smarter. But if we basically stick to the first definition and say, will the machines in a way have at least a general understanding and the general intelligence of a human, then that will very likely happen in the next 30 to 40 years. But the much bigger question is, one, who would have access to that technology? And how would that impact us? And I think the image that we have right now is just not really clear about it, because it's a situation that none of us have encountered before. And we are very smart creatures. In the absence of any real model of the world, what do? We look at Hollywood. What are they teaching us? What are they feeding us in terms of the futuristic vision of the world? And we look at sci-fi. So I think our images, our perception of singularity is very much being driven by what we see in the media, and for a very good part of it, it's probably not true, because no one has really a good understanding of how that will impact us. But regardless, it's something that's going to be part of the fight between big technology companies, because those basically have access, and possibly nations too, because these are really the people with the kind of access that you need to develop such a technology. So the big question is, how is this going to impact maybe not people, but really the big technology firms and their influence on people's lives?
Thank you. Want to respond?
Yeah, I just wonder if I can just, what I like thinking about from the singularity concept is about, just how much raw computing power you have. So to a certain extent, we have a certain amount of neurons in our brain, and, 2020 is the year when we're supposed to have that in a $1,000 computer, according to Kurzweil. We're probably very close to that, or maybe we've even gone a little bit beyond it. That just means that, okay, I can make this many calculations. So we don't need to know what that number is, it's just a large number. But the other conjecture there is, in another few years, he's kind of around 2029 or so, we'll have enough computing power for maybe 1,000 brains. And then by 2045-ish, if you follow that graph, there's a nice little graph you should have it up, but we have, $1,000 computer, more computing power than all of the brains on the planet combined. That's just raw computing power. When we start talking about how do we hook this all up and get the right software structure similar to the models that we saw, which are all based on things that we learned about the way how the human brain operates fundamentally. So we end up at a spot where, to a certain extent, can my cell phone start to think? It has, if you have a $1,000 cell phone or a $1,000 computer, are you close enough to that brain in a box scenario? Keep in mind, so that's the $1,000 computer. The supercomputers, the IBMs of the world, the big businesses, the Googles, well, they've already surpassed that, in 2015, 2014. Like, we're already well in that space where, we have more processing power than the human brain. So that's a really beautiful kind of scenario, because we don't know what we're going to do when we fully understand how to put these things in the right structure. I don't know if anyone wants to kind of talk to that.
Yeah, I think that's more or less in line with, I guess, just piggyback to what you said in the end, is we're getting to a scenario where it's really hard to predict what's going to happen next, right? So I think, there are many definitions of singularity, and the one that I kind of think about a lot is they all just pretty much come down to the basic idea: we're going to reach to a state where we will not know even tomorrow what tomorrow will look like, because the world changes so fast. So that could either be caused by AI or caused by biological engineering, but the singularity to me just what, we're going to get to a state where it's really hard to predict what's going to happen in the future. So now, in that sense, how does that impact us? Well, I think, coming back to the art, I think the people that should be worried are people like me, who's working on doing my very mundane jobs, research, right? It's just very much like search over like a big space of problems and try to solve them, and then machines are the best at doing that. And where on the other side, there's the jobs of, the homemaker, the social workers who go visit the seniors and have conversations with the elders, and those are the jobs that are going to be really hard to replace, because we naturally gravitate to the people that look like us, right? No one would like to hang out with a machine. Certainly, I do not want to hang out with a machine when I'm getting old. So in terms of implications, maybe everyone's going to revert back to do all humanity things, right? Humans going to do human things, and machines going to do what machines are best at. And really, they have no use for people. But we do, right? We have needs for each other. I think that's kind of like the take-home message.
I don't don't know if I can follow up.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So I really like this topic, so I can talk about this for a while. But the idea that the pace of change is happening so quickly, right, is such that, okay, we hit 2020, right, and now, we're saying, everything's going to double, or even more than double every 2 years or so, right? So standard Moore's law type of thing, which in certain circles, we've kind of surpassed in certain ways with graphical processing units and so forth. But what that means is, 5-year span, 10-year span, we're now starting to, so this room will probably still be here in the same structure. The way we interact with any kind of intelligent information object, right? That's exponentially, that's massive amounts of intelligence. So if we start to think about, how, so we have two kinds of things. So we have the pace of change of the technology, then we have the crawl of the pace of change that we currently have for ourselves, where we just want to go through our daily lives and kind of achieve our goals in certain ways. Now, one thing I want to kind of iterate and highlight is the idea that we're probably going to have to work together with AI systems. We're going to have to be a bit more cybernetic. Almost, we already kind of are, everybody in this room has a little phone somewhere. And the notion is, and there's somebody already working on figuring out how to attach that to your brain, right? That person's Elon Musk. So, we can expect that there's going to be some interesting ways that we interface with information and intelligence in the next, 5 to 10 years. Now, that doesn't mean that society is going to randomly shift immediately, because it takes us a long time for making those kinds of adjustments. But, how long did it take for us to start to go from the world where everyone had a less smartphone to the world where everyone has a smartphone? And then whatever the next medium is going to be, is that a shorter and shorter time? And does that pace keep changing? Okay.
Okay, thanks. So we've actually drifted into the kind of notion of cybernetic human, and you've got something else. Let's get a microphone to you if we can.
I'll try to project really loudly. Can you hear me?
It's not very project-friendly room, so I'm gonna, thanks, Lee. Let's just pass that over. Just let us know your name. It's always nice to know.
Thank you.
Lucy?
My name is Sandra, and I just have a question. This is really exciting just to hear about. So when your machine learning has to be very iterative and keep learning, that's essential to it. And so Jimmy mentioned sort of research and some of those tasks becoming mundane, and then we become reliant on sort of what exists. What is the risk, or what are your thoughts, seeing as we can't predict? But what are your thoughts then on just having a static state? Everything is built based on what we have learned up to the point where we're not really inputting any more data, because all we're doing is taking from it. Thanks.
So that's a really interesting question. Just trying to reiterate, it's like, as I understand it, it's like, so we're building on our wealth of history, and after that we're basically data mining without having to create more, I guess, novelty or innovation. It's like reaching a kind of steady state as opposed to a singularity. I'm looking at you, Jimmy. I don't know if you want to answer that one.
Yeah, that's a great question. So essentially that's, I guess in research it's called the topic called reinforcement learning, where now you learn everything from a human expert as you can. And now you got beyond past the expert's ability, so you're almost like a superhuman performance. So the agent or the AI can still keep interacting with the world. They eventually realize that, oh, all I need is to harness the universe's energy, right? That makes me more powerful. And then they would just go out and colonize the space and build all those things. Probably most of them are not going to be very useful to human, and it's probably not even matter to us. As long as the machines continue creating some wealth for human that maintain our current life standards, right? I'm sure no one will actually really care. So I think the answer is yes. So after mining all the data, we have the static data. we have to make kind of like a little leap of faith that, hey, maybe we can allow the machine to interact with the real world, interacting with us, by having very simple conversations or building buildings for us, right? There could be a lot of consequences. What if, I guess self-driving cars, what if the machine just wander off and decided, iRobot scenario, right? So yes, definitely Hollywood is very pessimistic about it.
I think it's a great example where you can see how this doesn't happen. Hollywood now there's a data service where you send your Final Cut to the data service, and they analyze it to tell you whether it's going to be a blockbuster movie or not. And they're looking at everything like ridiculous things like color and pace, but its accuracy is high. But there were plenty of movies that get predicted as blockbusters, which then fail. And that to me is great, because it means it's one of the last bastions here, is that there's still a role for the human, the creativity and the kind of flawed logic that we have, which so far robots aren't generating. I'm going to go on a slightly different question, and this one's for you, Leyla. And the question is around, is AI arbitrary and lacking in transparency? And I think the example is, I'm just about old enough to remember going to visit a real bank manager as a student to ask for a loan, and having to put on a suit and persuade him that I was reliable and, etc. It's all the things I wasn't as a student, of course. I think I did get that loan. But now, probably many of you have experienced a situation where you get turned down flatly for something from a financial institution, particularly if you're, say, I don't know, maybe you're a creative without regular income, etc. And then the institution is unable to give you an explanation. And my understanding, having read some of the literature, is sometimes those institutions don't really understand the decision themselves, because there's been an AI component in that. What are your thoughts on that, Leyla? I know you're close to those sort of things.
So first, the philosophical answer to that is, I read somewhere, it wasn't a very credible source, but we make about 35,000 decisions a day. Let's assume that number is just totally off. And let's just stick to 50 of them, which kind of matter throughout the day, other than, whether I want to pick up this glass and have a sip of water. Now, are you actually able to explain those decisions? Probably no. Like if somebody asks you, why did you wear that today, or how did you answer that question, you would have a hard time explaining yourself. But we are so the bank manager who sees you and instantly decides they cannot trust you, based on almost nothing other than maybe a handshake or a smile, they cannot explain that decision to their manager, other than, I don't have a good gut feeling about this, right? However, we are imposing much more stringent criteria on machines to say, well, you should be able to explain to me how you came up with that decision, which is usually not based on emotion or biases, but it's based on data. Now, it's possible that data is wrong. That's a separate story. But in theory, actually not all models are really lack transparency. There is usually there's a line between interpretability and complexity. Obviously, the more complex they get, the less easier it is to explain them. But then there are some fairly, they still give you good results. They're not as complex. And there is a good chance that you can say why this decision was made. Maybe not with 100% accuracy, but at least you can trace it. Now, and this is really, explainability of AI is a very hot topic these days. And one issue with it is there are almost two ways to look at it. One is from the perspective of the researcher. What is when Jimmy's working on an algorithm, he wants to know why he's getting certain output. And he's really looking deep into the model to see how it's behaving or how it's building its network. another one is from the perspective of the end user or the business user, which is oblivious to the inner workings of a model and is only trying to see, well, why am I getting this output based on my input? And a lot more work is being done on the first problem. Why? Because, well, it's the researchers who are working on these models. Of course, they want to understand them better. But not as much work done on the second part of it, which is really for the end consumer. And for good reasons. I mean, part of my job is to communicate that to, for example, our clients and say, how do we come up with some numbers? It's not always easy, but it's not that they lack transparency. I don't think so.
There's a lot of guesswork going on, right? In terms of figuring out, okay, is this a cup or not a cup, right? There's a certain amount of things, features within that particular calculation, right? That as humans we might do, automatically. That means that we have models upon models upon models in our brains that recognize those features. Now, sharing those features and talking about those features, that's where we're in that exact same spot of saying, okay, how do we, say, oh, why am I wearing this thing? If we spend the time to think and reflect, we could generate a reason why we might think this particular way or not about what we selected. And the goal is for us to figure out how to get systems to actually kind of do that with some degree of reliability. But then we're left with the question of how do we explore that, right? In the next few, this is all part of this new wave of what we do with these more complicated models or more let's say these trained up models. But the next wave will probably be towards a more easily applied and more well understandable set of models. I don't know if Jimmy wants to kind of speak to a little bit of that.
Yeah, I certainly agree that mostly of if not all, I think we're all on the same camp that the neural networks we have today or machine learning models, they're a lot less opaque compared to a human manager sitting in front of you and BSing whatever that's on his mind or whatever he ate in the morning, right? So it's really hard to open up the brain of a human and examine exactly what the thoughts being generated. It's a lot easier to open the brain of a neural network of a machine and look at how exactly at each steps, the final decisions being made. So let's draw an analogy here, right? So in the 1950s, Alan Turing, which so some of you guys have seen the movie Imitation Game, is kind of like essentially wrote a paper that's really questioning is it possible for machines to have intelligence. That essentially kicked off the entire research of AI. And at the end of the paper, Turing essentially conjectured that if this would ever happen, because of the amount of power, energy we can harvest to build those machines, then we'll teach those machines just like how the school teachers in elementary school teach our kids. Of course, that's very far away from what actually happens to teach those machines today. But I would imagine just like how we in a school teacher, in school we teach those students to learn a particular concepts, right? And then how do we know the student actually learned the concept? How do we know the student actually overfit it, right? Just memorizing the test. But we have all the tools we developed in early childhood educations and in the K-12 systems or the high school system where we have exams, right, to test those students to know that whether whether they're cheating or not, right? So those are the mechanisms we use to test humans, and we can use the same mechanism to test machines. And even go a step further, when someone feels had like well, we have neuroscience research to go into like a human's mind, right, to figure out what's happening to the brain of human. and in the machine learning research now we actually have some group of machine learning researchers specialized almost like the neurosurgeon for neural networks, in a sense that they will like dedicate their research to look at how exactly a trained model making those mistakes by examining one neuron at a time, right? And by changing those neurons a little bit, how does the decision will change. So we're very far away to develop a very concrete theory to explain why certain things happen. But just like in neuroscience, I think, we have good hope to believe that, with enough research and a new way of thinking about, looking at a machine just like a human brain, eventually we can develop some sort of understanding of how those decisions being made. And I'm not hopeful to understand the trained neural networks that understand another human being's decision.
Okay, thanks. So that's interesting. So I'm going to ask a little follow-on question, and it really relates, because I love the topic title, Can Machines Be Flawed Enough to Be Human? We've talked a lot, Jimmy, about how machines can learn in the way that humans can, and sometimes be even better and faster. One of the things I'm very aware of is the fact that from a creative perspective, a lot of my most interesting output comes from making tons of mistakes, and actually not mistakes and then learning, but mistakes that then take me down another path. Yeah? So they're part of my creative process. And I know, how many people here have got creative backgrounds or activities in the audience? It's a few. Okay. So I don't know if you find the same, but it's very hard sometimes to actually plan something and execute it without a lot of stuff happening on the way. Yeah? And then that stuff can be better than what you intended to do in the first place. How can the sort of techniques that we've been talking about this evening capture that from the machinic perspective? And I think maybe Alexis, you can comment on this as well. But to me, I'm just wondering, because it doesn't seem to be part of like getting it right and incremental improvement and recognition.
So just, sorry to interrupt, just a quick note, because I know we're running a little short on time. Maybe we can spend about 5 minutes on this. We have 10 minutes for audience questions.
Sounds good.
So let me repeat it. So the question is, human has a lot of mechanisms we developed, even the book, Get Things Done, right, to help us to achieve certain goals without being too stressed out. It has tons of self-help books. And there's a question like, how do we make sure that the machines we have those mechanisms in place to achieve what we place them?
Well, I guess it's more specifically, like a lot of our most creative outputs can come from mistakes, errors, and they're not bad thing, yeah? So like, we learn badly, we do a lot of things that glitch, but as a result, we have a very rich culture and society. And I'm just wondering if machines are going to do as well.
Oh yeah, so that's actually, there's, from the algorithm side, I can tell you mathematically, we can actually prove that mistakes are more valuable than the positive examples. So so that kind of answers the question. But I guess the intuition here is that think about the progress of self-driving cars, right? What's limiting the progress of self-driving cars is not about having tons of data, unlimited data, the car roaming around the streets. The limiting factor here is actually the accidents. The amount of accidents decreasing. That means the amount of learning we're learning from our mistakes are getting lower. So, and that's the actual limiting factor of our self-driving technologies, is that we can't run these politically and commercially on the suicide to kind of create those kind of training data for our machines. So that's kind of the bottleneck for this technology. So in some sense, machine learns a lot from this mistake too. I guess human had this kind of ability that once you make mistakes, you kind of ponder on it a lot. You slap on a mistake, and tomorrow morning you feel really regretful. You're like, oh, what if I had done something else? This kind of like introspection of in our mind that going back in time and imagine ourselves did something else that could potentially achieve a better outcome. That particular thinking process is actually what I believe allows us to learn a lot more efficiently than a machine can. Where the machine does not have how to model the world, because I guess in my slide I talked about the currently machine just does not interact with the world. All it learns is just flashing the cars in front of it. So it doesn't understand how the world will evolve. So it doesn't have quite a bit of capability to kind of rewind back in time and think about what if I have done something else. what if that person get the credit in front of me, right? Now he has a credit card, he can go out and buy a car, and then his life is going to be a lot better. The machine does not have this kind of capability. So, and as I guess a lot of scientists in the field, we realize that's certainly a problem, and we're trying to address that.
Okay, so machines don't have regrets. Let's take questions. The gentleman in the groovy hat. Tell us your name, please.
It's Alex. I'm just curious because I was looking with neurotechnology news, and obviously that does some sort of modeling and understanding of the human brain. I'm just curious from your perspective how meaningful it is to try to have AI emulate sort of that human way of thinking. Because obviously, like looking at spurious data points, it's like how our neurons all connect and we make mistakes and make associations. But then from there, how much is it meaningful to imitate humans versus to try to trust in what AI can do better than what we can?
Okay, Alexis, do you have a shoulder?
Sure. So, to a certain extent, from almost the very beginning of when we're exploring AI, Jimmy mentioned Alan Turing. We've always been referring to what we learn about ourselves, because we have at least, I don't know what the number is on the number of billion people on the planet now. I think we're at 7 or so, examples of things with consciousness, things that we can learn from. But this learning, of course, is by observation and kind of looking back at certain elements there. But from the neuroscience side, where you're exploring, okay, if I stimulate this particular, the retina, and now I have this behavior going on in this optic nerve that's going through these different layers of the brain. Well, it turns out that that recognition and that understanding of that process opened the way for a lot of the computer vision work that we're now seeing take off right now. So being able to think about hierarchies of where you pass in some information, train about that, and pass it to something else. You train about that, and pass it to something else, and layer up and layer up and layer. Now we start to see things that recognize, oh, that's a dog and that's a cat, because it's the combination of all of these different features. So, when we're looking at these systems, we should definitely keep that in mind. We're referencing the human brain and the structures that we know about in these kinds of the most successful machine learning models, but there are other ways to make certain learning approaches. So yeah, my short answer is that yes, we really need to do even more about that, because we're not at the level of depth and structure of, let's say, meta level learning, which would be really interesting. I don't know, pretty exciting stuff.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Let's get another question right at the back there. Yeah. Thank you.
My question is for Jimmy, and it's regarding the word democratization of art in your presentation. And your model is very cool. And I see, perhaps I misunderstood, but you're saying that this model could present a model that's for the future of the artistic community. And I was just wondering, how could that be a democratization of art? Because what I have inferred is that there's potential to pull the artist out, right? If you're saying you can put in 15 songs and get a song out of that, where's the musician? And you're saying, well, we don't have to pay copyright, but then what happens to the artist? Where is the artist going to make the money from? Is it something I've misunderstood, or it could be grounds for discussion?
Oh yes, so I guess, so the question is, how do we see the artists today and the machines that seemingly popping out this infinite amount of good goodies, and what's the dichotomy between the two, and what's our place? So I guess the point I kind of quickly went over was within all 4 pillars of art, the examples I showed was not purely generated by the machine. was a lot of human inputs. In the song, for example, it was sung by a human, actually collaboration with different artists. And it was very elaborate, cherry-picked samples from machine-generated lyrics that makes it even catchier, right? So humans kind of like this like high-level manager, right? You like, I want to have some song that's kind of like having a melody A combined with the chorus B, combined with chorus and then kind of instead of doing all the tedious work of rearranging the notes and then like shifting things a little bit, transposing it, machine go do it, right? So that's kind of like much more in line with how artists using a tool today. And I think so that happens both in the example I didn't go through is in the creative writings. So now we have those machines that can generate those some crazy scenarios. One of the examples in the slide was there's the website called AI Dungeon. Essentially, just use the same technology that generated my CV or my bio. They put that into creative writing. So, or like some sort of online game, but if you for someone who's old enough like me, have played those games, online game called Mud. It's like text-based, online games with typing a scenario, right, and then the machine come back to you, what happened in the world. And then we have this, essentially, all the scenarios being imagined by the same model that I used to generate my bio. So it's already been happening that a lot of writers start using this to generate ideas. So they have some outline, a sketch of the story, type in the machine, they kind of get stuck on what would be the interesting subplot that's happening. Why don't the machine generate subplot for me? Well, it seemed like a bit of hypocrisy to creative writing and literature, but this is already happening, right? Tom Clancy, he didn't write any of the stories, right? He hired a bunch of ghostwriters, he gave them the clear outlines to generate, that's how you pump out so many books, right? So now no one everyone, all the artists, inspired artists, doesn't have to be as rich as Tom Clancy to do those. Now you have the technology in your bedroom, or you need just a laptop to actually be as prolific as any of the artists' major studios that you can be.
So that's amazing. I'm thinking the whole line Stephen King, probably by the time he passes away, we can just keep generating Stephen King books. Okay, another question. Yeah?
I think this is your last one.
Okay, last question.
Hi, I'm just wondering, what are any of your thoughts on the humanitarian, political, societal implications of AI? Because what if the singularity is not can we create a better intelligence than our brain? Because I don't know, it could be wishful thinking, and we don't even really understand the brain that much if you look at neuroscience. What if the biggest application of AI is the one thing we do create, which is our society, our culture, our world? And what if the singularity is the IOE is the infrastructure, and AI is the operating system, the software? You talked about discrimination and how we might be able to program that out in a way. What if instead of dealing with governments and so forth, we were dealing with an operating system which saw every human as a value of just one? And you know what I mean? It could take all prejudice out. What do you do you have any thoughts of that, or could you point me in a direction of theory?
Let's pass on over to Leyla, because we haven't asked for a little while. It's a tricky question.
I know.
It's the sort of almost it's an architectural question. It's that we're thinking about kind of replication as opposed to difference, I guess.
I personally, frankly, don't see a future where machines are running everything. I think the human in the loop is always going to be there, if for nothing else, for the fact that we want to be involved in our own destiny. So I personally don't see a scenario where everything is being decided by an artificial intelligence OS. Even today, much of the work that's being done, it's really to somehow empower you to do what you're already doing better. Now, I think ignoring the technology would be very dangerous. So no matter what profession you're in, whether you're an artist or you're a doctor, ignoring the profession is very dangerous. Ignoring the technology is very dangerous because it's gonna be there and it's gonna be part of your life. It's just a matter of how do I use this to my benefit. And I think the future is just not about the power of AI, it's the power of what we call HI plus AI, human intelligence plus that. And what you really want is a more, and from my perspective, the real danger is in the gap that it's going to create in the society between those who have that access, who have that power, and those who don't. Because we think we live in an equal society today. Watch what happens when that happens. We're talking about an exponential gaps between basically different groups of people.
I think, Jimmy, you hinted at that when you were talking about the kind of data poor demographics, yeah. I think we're going to wrap up now. I hesitate to mention this, but it's kind of interesting because in 2011, there was a book I bought called The Net Delusion. I bought it because all the academics were raving, in fact, general public were raving about the internet, what a force for good it was. We had our spring, all sorts of amazing things, and then this one academic wrote a book about how terrible the internet could be, and we were all like, just like too negative. Of course, now it's like the book's like the bestseller. I think we're in the same situation with AI. I know we're all optimists here, and we're kind of realists as well. So I kind of hope it goes the way that we'd like it to. But I think one of the things I'd say about this gallery, this exhibition that I curated, is that it is generally the work's upbeat, it's positive, but it's there to make us think as well. And I think one of the important things for society now and our culture is to really be reflective about where this stuff is going and should go. The atom bomb, it wasn't Oppenheimer who decided what to do with the atom bomb, he invented it, or he developed it. It was politicians and it was a military-industrial complex that decided to use it. And I think I would say the same with AI, is that it could be the greatest force for good or the worst. I mean, every Pixar movie seems to have an evil genius, It's almost like we live for the bad stuff as well as the good as humans. To wrap up, I'd like to thank Leyla, Jimmy, and Alexis for coming to. I want to call you Alexa, because of the connection. So let's have a big hand for our panelists. We could really continue this for hours. That's a lot of fun. And thanks so much for coming, and also to the gallery for organising this. And if you enjoyed the exhibition, enjoyed the talk, do tell your friends and AIs about this. I think there's more events you'll see online. I know there's film night coming up. Yep, coming up soon. There's workshops as well, so if you look at the Onsite gallery, you can see all sorts of things. Okay, thank you very much.